All right. Welcome, everybody. This is Michael Porcelli. I'm with Bedrock Culture and Leadership. So make sure you all can hear me out there. You pipe in on the chat if you can.
I'm Josh Zemel. I'm also with Bedrock, and got some good stuff for you today. I'm excited.
All right. Great. Cool. So I'm just going to dive in. If there's an issue here with the video or the audio, just pipe in, and Jen is going to help us out with support on this. So today we're going to talk about 3 keys to healthy relationships at work. And this is going to be a kind of interactive session. So if we stop and ask a question, you may want to raise your hand, or we'll click on your name. You can speak up, or you can just type it into the chat. Either one is fine. And here we go. So what do we mean by a healthy relationship in general? We're starting it off with a question. So if anybody wants to share a thought about what they think makes for a healthy relationship, what they think is a healthy relationship, I'd love to hear a few thoughts. Mutual benefit is what Greg says here. Trust from Eva. I agree. A relationship that is respectful. Reciprocity. Mitigated conflicts. Yep. Cool. There's a little instruction there. If you want to raise your hand in a webinar, we can actually get your voice on. Listening carefully, the possibility to grow, empathy. These are all terrific answers. Yeah. Autonomy. All right. Not to take things personally. It's just work. Yes, for work relationships, that can be a good tip. And we're going to share a little bit about what we mean by healthy relationships, and or at least what we're going to emphasize for today. So healthy relationships make for effective collaborations. So a lot of the discussion about mutual benefit and reciprocity, I think, fit in there. Connection. This is oftentimes people's ideas of a sense of belonging, a sense of human contact, senses of empathy usually are associated with that, and growth. Some people said growth in there as well. So I think these are 3 key signs. If you've got these 3 things going on, you probably have a healthy relationship. Or alternatively, think about relationships you consider to be healthy, and you'll probably find at least 2 of these, usually all 3. And that doesn't discount the other things that you guys suggested. These are just 3 of the key areas that we think are common to all healthy relationships. All right, so how do you have healthy relationships? We all kind of know what they are, maybe what they feel like. Maybe you're thinking about some of them yourself. But how do we foster these? How do we have more of that in our lives? So I think it boils down to 2 things here: authenticity and receptivity. These are themes that are woven throughout all communication, all relational contact. And by authenticity, I mean your ability to reveal what's going on for you, your ability to represent your perspectives and your desires, to ask for what you want, or to create healthy boundaries, to express yourself in a genuine way. And receptivity is your ability to meet people where they're at, to listen with empathy, to listen in a way where you can understand where they're coming from, to be able to take on their perspective, to hear and respond to their requests and their desires. And the title here is 3 keys. This is sort of like 2 themes in a way that weave through these 3 keys and all of the relational and conversational tips that we have for you today. You'll see ingredients of authenticity and receptivity woven throughout all of them. So now we're going to dive into the 3 key practices that we have for you. The first one is creating context. The second one is clearing the air. And the third one is making things right. We think of these as 3 practices that probably you already do in some form or another. And if you're able to do these 3 things well, this will probably also correlate to relationships that you think of as healthy and strong and have all those characteristics we talked about earlier that makes good relationships. So we're going to go into these one by one, and we're going to start with creating context. So before we do that, this is going to be a little Socratic interaction here. What is context? What does that word evoke for you? What do you think of it? What does it mean? Go ahead and you can either raise your hand or post in the chat. What is context?
In order to raise your hand, like Jen pointed to, you can click on the participants button if you're on your desktop, and then you'll see a raise hand button pop up.
Oh, nice.
There's a way on mobile as well.
Okay, Gabby says, having a shared understanding of our surroundings. Yep. Karen says, the backstory, the narrative or story we tell. Yep, totally. Both of those fit into context. The bigger ecosystem in which the specifics happen. Yep, that's also true, which makes sense in our relationships. All the things that involve a situation, shared values, the facts around a subject. Yes, totally. This is great. These are all aspects of context. Context is one of these things that we're swimming in it like all of the time. Okay, here's a Q&A over here. What does that button mean? I don't know what that means. I'm going to keep talking. All right.
The environment where we are, even if we don't understand it, is what the attendee said in the Q&A panel.
Yes. So you could sit there and you can kind of like reflect on like all the context in which you are in, the time of day or the room that you're in, or who is there with you or not there with you. It can be like historical things that led up to that moment. It can be the reason we're having this meeting together. It can be all kinds of things, especially in the relationship context as these kinds of relationships like this. These are my business partners, or this is a friend, or this is a spouse or a child or something like that. Those also form context.
Your golf buddies, the bus driver,
that's
you
right.
know, is context in which you relate to somebody, you know, your lover or your intimate partner or your spouse. And maybe those 3 things all mean different things, and those are all different contexts. Or even like you said, Porch, just how we're going to spend the next hour together in a meeting is a form of context which can be implicit or made explicit.
Yep, totally. And also in context, these identities that are at play that we often think of, like culture of origin, race, gender, these can all be part of context. So we're going to go into how this is relevant to this first key in communication skill. So think about what happens when context is clear and mutual amongst the people who are present together. Whatever the context you're in, it seems like everyone's on the same page. Everyone is like consenting in some way or moving in the same direction, there for the same purposes or reasons. And think about moments when the context is not clear and mutual. Maybe it's not clear or mutual to most, if not all, of those people, or some subgroup of people is sort of seems to be clear and mutual about something and another is not. So this is food for thought, and we're going to actually have a little Q&A with you in just a moment, but I want to be planting the seed right now. Think about in your own life, your own examples of that, especially if you have a story of one or the other of these things.
And Porch, when you say among the people who are together, I think you mean it could be physically together at a given time, or you might also mean among the people in a given relationship over a period of time. The context might be clear and mutual between two people over time, or a group over time, or it might not be.
That's right. Yeah. It can be sort of in the here and now, or broader. Are we on the same page about what our relationship is about? Yes. Over time. Cool. You want to take them into the sharing, Josh, this next part?
Yeah, we just thought we would make this a little bit, interactive once again. And so again, let's invite, if you want to comment, that's just fine in the chat. But this particular dialogue moment might be a good opportunity if somebody actually wants to speak up and share with this group about, and I'm just going to repeat it, about any relationship or relationship situation or situation with people together in person or over time where people were on the same page, context was clear and mutual, or it was not. And what was that like? If nobody wants to share, Porch and I'll kind of share some examples from our lives, but it would be great to get a little bit of a dialogue going. So if that's you, let us know. We'll give it a moment here.
All right, Jen's ready to unmute you if you do the hand raise thing.
Maybe it's good if I start and break the ice a little here, Porch.
Sure.
So that give people kind of, I know it can be, I imagine that it can be, I don't know if it's potentially intimidating or just slightly intense or in some way or other to speak to a whole group of anonymous participants on a webinar.
Sure.
And just continue to consider if that's you, and if you're up for sharing with the group, we'd love to hear from you. But in the meantime, I'll just say that I had this experience in college where I had a best friend. At least I really thought he was like a best friend. And we just did all sorts of stuff together, and I felt just, super intimate with him, and, quite, in a sense, invested and even reliant. And what I probably didn't realize at the time was sort of dependent on, the sense of kind of togetherness, brotherhood, partnership that I felt with this guy friend. And he basically just kind of ejected suddenly. And I felt incredibly awful about it. It was really one of the more profound disappointments and hurts, of my early adult life. And I just didn't understand it. And he was avoiding me at parties and so forth. And when I finally was able to communicate, or when he finally, would respond and let me know kind of what happened, probably a year later, he just said that our friendship was his words were too intense for him. And what I realized is that this whole idea that I had that we were like a thing who kind of did a lot of things to, like primary friends or something, like best friends, like, we knew everything that was going on with each other and communicated on the daily. That was never something that he really felt like he had an opportunity to consent to. And I had sort of kind of taken it for granted. But if I kind of rewind, like one of those, matrix moments where I kind of look back on the whole relationship, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that we weren't really on the same page about it the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example. So I have a story coming up, but I want you guys to just be considering it, your stories, even if you don't choose to share it with us, especially think of moments, specific relationships like what Josh just shared. And it might be something kind of big like that, like a friendship over time, but it could also be like a particular conversation or a meeting. I had this friend of mine, I think you might remember, I just shared it with you recently, Josh, like she and I reconnected just a couple of months ago, and one of the things that we ended up sharing with each other was we felt some mutual romantic interest in each other, and we got to talking, and she shared with me that there was, like, I knew her from years ago, where she was part of our community in Boulder, and she was visiting actually as a student from Canada. And she said to me, like, hey, how long have you been interested in me? Because I was really interested in you all those years ago, and I tried letting you know. And there was this conversation. I'm like, there was this conversation we had back then that, you know, she was really enthusiastic about sharing about me in a general way, like I'm a good friend or I'm a great communicator or this sort of thing. And I didn't really think to clarify, like, what does she really mean by this? Or what does that mean about the connection between us? And so I sort of missed an entire opportunity from some years ago because that context was not clear, like why she was sharing those things with me. It was kind of disappointing to find that out years later.
Disappointed to find that out years later, like if only I had known or something.
Totally. Yeah. Here Andrea says, we flow through the context we create. Our relationships are more effective. We specify actions. It is simpler. That's true.
I also just want to land for folks, you know, another variety of examples that they may or may not be thinking of, which is, you know, in meetings, you know, in the workplace. I imagine many of you have examples that you can think of, or maybe aren't as top of mind, but have happened for you, where things flow well in a meeting or collaboration session, some kind of work session, or things don't. And how much of that delta has to do with whether people are on the same page about what ought to be happening, how that time ought to be being used. I know, like, one thing I really value about Porch Years and my, you know, collaboration time is that it seems like we're always very clear on the priorities for how we're going to spend the time. And if there's any difference about how we ought to spend the time, we have ways of working that out efficiently, getting on the same page, making a decision about that, and then sticking to that context. I also love our collaborations with basically everybody at HolacracyOne for that same reason, and the efficiency that I experience. As compared to, I imagine most people have been in some variety of meeting in their work career where, you know, it just seems like there's maybe the person who is leading the meeting or seems to be most, you know, the most powerful decision maker about how time does get spent is actually not spending it in a way that you think it ought to be spent. And then the meeting goes by and you're like, wait, I totally thought we were gonna, like, oh man, friggin' happened again, where, like, I thought we had this stuff that we were gonna get to and we totally didn't get to it. And I guess it wasn't totally my call.
Yep.
For whatever other reason, we just didn't do it.
Yep.
And that is off the rails. And Porch, I want to point out that we have a raised hand.
Awesome. Let's do it. Yeah, Jen, can you click on Peyton here? Something. Wait, talking permitted. Say something, Peyton. Hello? Is he muted?
He's coming. He's coming. There he is.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. How are you?
We're great.
Excellent. This is Peyton in Austin.
Awesome.
Yeah, you know, I had a really interesting situation. So when I was young, I started this job, and they told me all about the job, and I started doing it, and I was determined to do the best job I possibly could, and I was just like really knocking it out of the park, so I thought. And So about 2 weeks into this, I get called into the office, and I think they're going to tell me something great. And instead they're telling me that, hey, you know, you really got to step it up here. Your metrics and this and this and this are horrible. And I didn't know that they didn't want me to be the best, you know, person for their company I could be in one way. What they really wanted was for me to be fast. They didn't give a crap about customer service or anything else. All they wanted was for me to do the situation quickly and move on to the next one. And they hadn't made that clear. And so, you know, I completely readjusted everything and did fine, of course. But it was interesting because the context of what my job was supposed to be was never clearly defined to me. And
that's such a great example, Peyton. Thank you. I love it. I mean, it basically is like you're pointing to like what, you know, it sounds like you had a high priority on quality. They actually had a high priority on speed. Sometimes speed and quality can exist in tension with one another. And if I were to broaden this point, I would just point to like, these are varieties of strategic priorities. And in a company or any organization, the strategic priorities are a form of context.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for your contribution, Peyton. I really appreciate you stepping up and being our first caller. It's good to talk to you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. There's one from Karen here that says, a meeting with a doctor to discuss a treatment plan going forward. Unbeknownst to me, this doctor was very autocratic, and I want a participatory collaboration in my treatment, surgery, etc. I found a different doctor who believed in patient participation. Yep. So this is a bit of like a values idea that can form part of context, or like an approach, like a how. That's a great example. And back to the workplace thing, just because I know this is a Holacracy interested audience, maybe many of you are practitioners of Holacracy, role definitions, the governance of the organization in a Holacracy sense is really a version of context that applies in Holacracy powered organizations. And that actually makes for working relationships to be clearer. It's just this idea about clear and mutual context applies generally, whether you're doing it using Holacracy or you're doing it outside of Holacracy. All right. I think we've had our discussion on context. Let's move on to sharing about how we teach to do this one, how to create context. All right. It's 2 parts. You make an invitation. You establish consent. Pretty simple.
That's it.
That's it. Yep. Now, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of detail into these kinds of things. We're going to share a little bit about that. But like sometimes I know that I used to communicate in a way where I would forget to even make the invitation. It would be sort of like I'm having some kind of inner dialogue, and then I just sort of start talking somewhere in the middle of my thought stream, and the person's looking at me like, why are you saying this? You want to talk to me about something, but I'm not sure why. So like to actually kind of back it up a second and say invitation-like material really helps. And then checking to make sure people are on board before I just sort of plow forward. So this is, you know, establishing consent is sometimes, you know, it's not quite like democracy where we're voting, but you'll be able to kind of tell, you know, when people are ready to go with the invitation that you've established. All right.
We sometimes call it buy-in. Like, does it seem like they're bought in? Whether or not they even verbally say yes or no, does it like, do you feel like they're bought in?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe just simple nods and that sort of thing.
Nods.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go in and share a little bit of how to make an invitation, because this is kind of the core initial thing that you do. So first, I want to say this is like an internal step, is to connect with purpose. This is this idea of like starting with why. Like, why do I want to create this context, to have this interaction, to have this meeting, to have this conversation, whatever it is.
This variety of relationship, whatever
it might be. Yep. Then feel your why and have it include something that's not just all about you, but it's also inclusive of something good on behalf of the people who you're wanting to create this context with, and for the relationships amongst those of you who you're inviting. Right? Imagine you wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't at least some amount of something in it for them to some degree, even if it is sort of like, hey man, I think I got some like interesting shit to say that you might like to hear, and you might just have a good time listening to me talk, right? Like it could be that simple, but I imagine you're going to like it if I'm sharing, but it can be anything. Give a headline. Giving a headline is just whatever you need to say, I'm inviting you to something. So it might be like, hey, I want to play a game, or hey, you down for a thing, or hey, can we all sit down, have a conversation? Anything like that, to more formal things like this is the meeting agenda for this afternoon's meeting with whatever, like meeting agenda, right? Then you give some specification of these particular details. You don't have to say all of them. You can say just enough to get people on board. So answer these questions like what, who, why, when, where, how, and how long or how often. Right? These are kind of the basic pieces of an invitation. Not all of them are included all the time. It would be sort of belabored if you tried to include them all the time to every single one. But you're going to at least need some of these, because if you don't do any of these, you're not really kind of making an invitation that's clear enough for people to consent to.
I give maybe a couple quick examples here, Porch, just to land this for folks.
Yep, go ahead. Great.
Yeah, so I mean, just to land it in kind of things we've already talked about, like if you're setting up a meeting, you know, your headline might be like, you guys down if I, you know, propose an agenda for this meeting? That might be your headline, and or hey, what do you think about for this meeting? And then you could go into what you think we ought to do. Who could be like what roles might be played by the various people at the meeting, right? You might do a how long. Seems like we're here for an hour. Does everybody can still stay for an hour? So those are some examples of around like a, you know, business collaboration. If I think about it in more of a personal context, you know, there's times where I might be like with a friend, you know, hey, there's something that happened for me the other day when we were interacting that I think it would be cool if we could clear up. Be good for our relationship, I think. Are you down for that? So yep. That's a little bit of a headline and a what, and then I might go on to kind of even share a little bit of the more of the why or anything else that felt relevant, just enough to get their buy-in or consent.
Yeah, I mean, and just so this doesn't sound like it has to be like really elaborate or in depth. Like there are times, even my relationship with you, Josh, I'll just be like, oh man, you're not going to believe what happened to me today. I want to share real quick. Can you just like listen for a second? And then you're like, sure.
That's it.
That's it.
We just said context.
Right. Yeah. Cool. And then he knows, oh, he's just listening. He doesn't have to figure out how to give me advice or help me to solve a problem. He can just listen, and that's his role. And
hey, Porch, can I get your help with something I'm working on? That's another thing. We just did it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in that case, I didn't need a whole lot of why and where, but there might be times where that stuff is really important.
Yep. And sometimes there's a back and forth there too. Somebody's like, hey, Josh, you know, can you help me out with something? And Josh might say, like, what is it? How long? And I'll be like, this particular item, probably about 10 minutes. And he'll be like, sure, or no, or something like that. Or I'm
what is this in
hour. Yeah.
What is this in service of? Why do you want my help specifically? Like, just so I can get enrolled. I mean, the why one is really where you have the opportunity to actually enroll the other person in a shared purpose. That's where you've connected with purpose. And if you can reveal something about that, they're more likely to get bought in. It's not always necessary, but that is a really, really good one to be ready to nail on in a variety of different situations.
Yep. It really helps with the established consent part. So that's as much as we're going to be able to go into for creating context. There's actually a whole lot more nuance to this, but this is a good first initial take. And we're going to move on to step 2, our second key, clearing the air. So think about that term. I know that means something in kind of a colloquial English, or at least in North American English or something. Clearing the air. Think about what that sounds like or what comes up for you when you hear that term. And here's a question for you to consider, and we want some responses from. So why do we need to clear the air? Why do we need this in a relationship? Why does this make for a healthy relationship? Why is it on this list of 3 key things? When you think in your life of moments where you've chosen to clear the air, why was it necessary? Anna says to stay in connection. Mm-hmm.
Very much.
To clear up a misunderstanding or a situation that was tense or stressful. Yep. And Karen says you don't want the old stuff getting in the way. And you also want to check assumptions. Yep. Johanna says to restore flow and clarity. Clear the air can also align expectations. To address tension. Yes. Good holacracy term there. Uh-huh. These are all great answers. Great. All right. So we're going to now ask you to share about this with us, especially if you have stories, kind of like what we did with the context one. Josh, you want to set them up for this?
Yeah. You just fill out the slide for fully here, Porch. So you've probably all had relationships that have hit some moments of difficulty or tension at some point. And in some of those cases, maybe something got cleared up. Things got cleared up in a mutually satisfying way, or things did not get cleared up successfully. And so I'm sort of speaking slowly in order so that you have time to kind of queue up for yourself if you have an example of this that you're interested in sharing with us and sharing with the group.
Yeah. So sometimes when things don't get cleared up successfully, it might be because you didn't try, or it might be because you kind of tried and it didn't go so well.
Right. Yep.
Oops.
When I think of failed either non-attempts to clear things up or failed attempts to clear things up, for some reason I think of family a fair amount. Like, and I think of my family, I think of people's families, and I think that that's fairly common, is like, yeah, well, I tried to talk to my dad about it, but that just didn't go well, or we just still weren't on the same page about the thing that happened, with so-and-so.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think sometimes when people think about clearing the air, it can feel like a little scary, like something like trying to do it failed, so maybe I should not bother. Like maybe the idea is like being a nice person or a harmonious person or a kind person means I'm really good at like working around these things and like not actually clearing them up. And then sometimes it sort of reaches the boiling point of some kind. And then you start trying to clear up a thing. And then you actually realize that there's like these things that are linked together that go into your past. Like, well, I kind of made an assumption about this other thing, and I thought I was being helpful when I did that. It's like, well, you didn't check, and I just went along with your thing. And then you kind of have these fights where this kind of accumulated amount of stuff, all from your past, starts coming forward, and you're like, wow, there's a lot more to clear up here than I thought. So this is kind of our argument for like, this is why clearing the air on a regular, often way is actually better than just letting them kind of accumulate.
I have an example of a time when it got cleared up successfully that I can share quick, unless there are.
We have Anna saying something.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Yeah,
Let's see.
say
I
what
have
Anna
the
said.
impression when it comes to basic values that don't match, it can be really tough.
Yeah.
That's more of a comment rather than a share. And I would say that can make it tough if you don't have basic values that match. I agree. But it doesn't make it impossible the way that we teach how to do it. Like you can clear the air in a way where you can create understanding of even what the differences are in your values. And this is a little bit of a maybe agree to disagree kind of thing. But it's a preview of where we're going in just a minute. Josh, you had a story about when it worked?
Yeah, when it worked. And I would just also say generally that, I think a lot of successful clearings of the air in my mind involve somebody letting somebody else know what impact an experience had on them. So, that's a variety of clearing the air that is very dear and, in my mind, integral to what we sometimes call relational hygiene, right? Keeping our relationships clean is like something happened between us, and here's what it was. I want you to know what it was like for me. And that might be in service of more just being known together, more connectedness, kind of, I might, be less likely to resent you, or I might actually free myself of resentment. It also might be in service of actually having things go differently in the future, which is a little bit more like a giving feedback. Is probably a variety or very related to clearing the air, where it's like, hey, when you did this thing, here's how it was for me. That wasn't my preference. And then maybe there's, a way to, an opening to have things go differently in the future. So one example I have of this is just the other day when, so I'm creating, I've rented this house, kind of at the edge of the mountains in Colorado, for a period of time. And I've been looking for people to come, actually one or maybe two people to kind of co-create, basically live there and kind of like co-create a really cool, like big house kind of nature, community hosting kind of vibe. And I had a friend who was very interested, and I was very excited about that. But then basically he got a different offer from another good friend of mine, to do a different thing and not do the thing with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met with the guy who made him the offer. I like, we actually played tennis, and at the end of our tennis match, I was like, hey, so I want to let you know about something that you did that had an impact on me that I don't think you're aware of. Are you open to hearing about it? And he very much was. And it went so well, that I ended up feeling closer to him as a result. And he's really interested in kind of helping figure out the perfect situation for everybody. And I felt just by virtue of I didn't really do anything else except, can I share with you the impact that you had on me that I don't think you're aware of? And I did. And it went just super well, just straight out of that.
That's a great example. Okay, there's a thing I haven't quite figured. There's a Q&A button notification here. I don't know quite how to address that one. Do you know how to do that one, Josh?
I think when I just click on the Q&A button, I do see the question. So Lori says, what about when you try to clear the air and the person you're speaking with denies the problem? Maybe, could get into that maybe when you get after you share a little bit about how to clear the air step.
Yeah. Here's another one. But to have the information aligned is not enough to clear the air. It's also important to clearly know what is to be done with it. I'd say yes and no. Sometimes it's enough to just have a shared understanding, and sometimes you do need to know what there is to be done with it. Sometimes you don't know. Like I'm gonna actually start bridging us into doing this, sharing our tips on how to clear the air. And hopefully that'll clear things up on what we mean by it. So you'll notice that there's something that just feels off. It might be about a particular moment or a situation that really didn't work for you, and you're like, oh, I want to like address that specific moment. Sometimes it can just be a kind of an accumulative feeling of like, oh, this person I used to be enthusiastic about, I feel more meh about, or maybe even more averse to. Why is that? You might actually start to remember things or uncover things just through a feeling indicator. Either case, it's a good idea to find a specific example or a moment. And this is going to go into how to clear the air. So our first tip is to speak inarguably. This is sometimes known as owning your experience. It's to choose words, to phrase things in such a way where it's not really debatable. Now, this might sound tricky. If you've ever studied nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg has a lot of examples of how to do this. We have similar tips on how to do this. Like, a feeling is your own. And if you use a feeling word, then that's not arguable. Also, if you describe the situation or the moment in pure third-person observation language, it's usually not debatable because it's as though there was a video camera. Hey, the other day we were standing over here in that particular room and these people were there. Do you remember that? Right? Like, yes, I remember that. Okay, so you're zeroing in on a specific memory. There's a lot to owning your experience, speaking inarguably, and it's almost like a communication superpower if you can get really, really good at it. And the better you are at it, the better you will be at clearing the air. And this, I think, kind of addresses this one from Lori, which says, what about when you're trying to clear the air and the person you're speaking with denies the problem? Even in this way that, Lori, you're sharing this, like, they may turn out to deny the problem or deny that whatever you're talking about is a problem, but you can probably share with them the event and you can share with them how you felt about it. And it's hard for them to deny the event and how you felt about it. Now, that it is a problem is maybe your assessment, which you can also share with them. But what you don't need is to get the person to agree with you. And we're going to get to that in just a second. The other key to clearing the air is weaving shared reality. Sometimes people think about this as shared understanding. I know a lot of the conversation nowadays about like what's going on social media and how people have a whole lot of different ideas about what reality is. Some people have called this a breakdown in shared reality. So it's very interesting to see this term starting to be used more often, shared reality. But if you think about anything like just like what it took to create mutual understanding, that itself, that's shared reality. Like when you have mutual understanding. How to do that? So here's how to do shared reality. Well, this is a definition of what I mean by shared reality. So we all know something. We all know that we all know that thing. And it is not agreement about it. You can actually have shared reality and agree to disagree. And it requires that you're both mutually confirming the thing. So if you're focused on convincing the person that it is a problem, you've now shifted away from prioritizing shared reality and you're kind of prioritizing something more like assigning blame or getting the person to agree with your assessment that
influencing somebody's perspective, changing somebody's view. All of those things are modes of conversation that are sometimes quite useful, but it's a little bit different than what Porch is talking about here, purely weaving shared reality.
Yes. And sometimes what will happen is people will update what they think. They will change their perspective or shift it in sometimes surprising ways. And sometimes you will be persuasive or convincing as an indirect result of focusing on weaving shared reality rather than trying to convince them. But I do think if you're owning your experience and you're weaving shared reality, this is a good way to clear the air. Another thing that I want to say about shared reality is it requires everyone to be participating in revealing about what happened from their own perspective. If it's just kind of this one-way street, I think this is like the hot potato clearing the air. I just want you to know that thing that happened the other day, that really sucked for me. All right, cool. Don't do that again, please. Right? There's not any weaving there because you're not hearing what it was like for that person. So when you're weaving shared reality, both people are getting a chance to share their perspective about what happened.
So maybe
yeah, go ahead.
I'll just paint a little color here, Porch, with a couple of hypotheticals. One that, so, to speak to Lori's question again, a little bit more specifically, like, what if the other person doesn't agree that there's a problem? What if, hypothetically, I think that Porches and my meetings have been super unproductive lately. And Porch, like, I think our meetings have been really unproductive lately. So weaving shared reality does not mean that Porch needs to agree that there's a problem. Porch needs to agree that the meetings have been unproductive. What actually needs to happen is that Porch needs to understand why I think that.
Yep.
And if he has a difference and he's like, gee, I thought we've been actually kind of crushing it in our meetings, and the priorities that we've held in our meetings I thought have been super aligned with what we ought to be doing. Weaving shared reality means me getting curious about that perspective and both confirming. So it's, me confirming with Porch that I get his perspective and him being like, totally, you got, yep, okay, you got that. And the other way also, vice versa of that. If we can really achieve all of that, like understanding one another's views on how the meetings have been, or understanding one another's experience on how the meetings have impacted us personally or impacted our work and our roles, that is all weaving shared reality.
Yep.
And if I go into language like our meetings, hey Porch, you know how our meetings have been really unproductive lately? I really want to do something about that. So I've actually just violated even speaking inarguably, because I've basically made this claim, right? So that's going to inhibit the weaving of shared reality if I'm not speaking to my own perspective on the meetings or how the meetings have been for me.
Yep. Then it's like I'm going into like a debate in my mind. Is he right about that? Is he wrong about that? And the orientation towards speaking inarguably shared reality is we're just trying to fill out the understanding more accurately and more completely. This will often get you all of the way to clearing the air. It will most often get you most of the way. And sometimes you may want to do something like create a new context, actually. And this is how these start interlocking, because that's something I think, I can't quite pronounce his name, but to clearly know what is to be done with it. Once you weave shared reality, you might realize, hey, this is what we want to go do about this going forward, in which case you're actually talking about creating context, and that clearing of the air can sometimes lead into that. And I'm going to show you more about how they interlock at the end of this conversation. All right. Number 3. Ready for number 3, Josh?
Number 3.
Making things right. So think about that phrase, making things right. What does that mean to you? What comes to mind? Maybe you can think about moments when somebody made something right with you, or you felt the need to go make something right with somebody else. Why do we need to make things right? What purpose does it serve when we do that sort of thing? You can think of if you ever have that impulse to apologize for something, that's where the desire to make things right or to make amends in some way.
Or if you ever wish that somebody would apologize to you, you're in touch with a desire that the relationship be made right.
Yep.
It shows that I care about the relationship, says Greg.
Yep.
Anna says to reduce fantasy on the other side about a situation. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Any other why you would want to make things right, folks? Why would you want to set things right? I think is what they say in UK English. Set it right, make it right. Some people think about this as like restoring something, like restoring integrity.
Oh, as you said the word restored, Joanna posted the word restore, shared goodwill and ease.
Yes. Yeah. Another word that comes up often is trust. If it feels like trust has been damaged in some way and you want to reestablish trust, that kind of felt sense that I can trust this person or I can trust this relationship. Or, hey, I might feel like you're having a hard time trusting me now. I want to do something to make that right so that you will trust me maybe in a way that you once did, but are having a hard time with. Peyton says, impossible to move forward if some of the people involved are stuck on something in the past. Yep.
For me, it's just from time to time, like in relationships, especially in relationships that I really care about, and the people who I'm close with over time in business or in my personal life, it is just inevitable that there will be things that need to get cleared up in service of the relationship remaining good, continuing, right? I just imagine my relationship would end, if we didn't effectively clear things up from time to time.
Yeah.
To clear the air. I like that.
Kind of funny. Yeah. Yeah. Making things right, I think, is, it sort of embraces this idea that, sometimes intentionally or unintentionally, we're imperfect beings, right? We're not going to like live perfectly at all times up to, the values that we espouse or the agreements or commitments that we've made. We aspire to be the best that we want to be in relationship with each other. We aspire to, do right by our word and our commitments and our agreements, and we all will inevitably fall short in some way. Making things right is the communication tool that you use when that happens. So now we're going to do a little bit of sharing. Let's see if people can think of examples. This is for you and me too, Josh. You want to take us through the sharing here?
Yeah, so in your mind, on your notebook, or moving toward maybe being interested in sharing out loud with the group, think of a moment when trust was broken or the relationship was broken in some way, and either the relationship was repaired in a mutually satisfying way or things did not get repaired successfully, right? It's a little bit different than just clearing the air. We're actually talking about instances where something was actually restored explicitly or as a result of things that were said explicitly toward restoration or repair. So either that went well and happened, or didn't happen, or didn't go well. If you have an experience like that you're willing to share with the group, let us know by raising your hand. And let's see if you have a good example, Porch, as well. I'm thinking of if I've got some good ones.
Yeah. Go ahead. You got one.
One of the reasons to repair that has not been said so far is that sometimes, like, I've learned that in order for me to do things differently in the future, reliably, I need to clean things up with people. Because if I don't clean things up with people and kind of sweep it under the rug, if I don't kind of call out my own bullshit, I'll just keep engaging in the same bullshit, really, because I'm almost like pretending that it's not there. But if I kind of interrupt that pattern and say, hey, I didn't love how I was with you the other day. I just want to let you know that's not how I want to be. Here's where I think I fell down. And maybe take a couple other steps, which Porch is going to share with you in a moment. I find that that's how I personally grow in my relationships and do things differently. Not to mention, of course, you know, people tend to feel a lot better about me after I restore integrity with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can think of a simple example. Like there was, it was your sister, Josh, when she would come pick me up sometimes on the way to work. We kind of an agreement like to meet outside at a certain time, and you know, she'd said, "Hey, will you be out at this particular time?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I will be." And then sometimes I would be late, and then I'd be like, "All right, I need to make this right." So, hey, you know, I would do the process we're about to share. And we actually ended up updating our agreement where it's like, it was kind of funny. We added a whole like built-in like penalties. This kind of goes into like the context a little bit. But like what happened was, you know, it was more to just than me just saying like, hey, I want to, you know, I'm sorry for this. It was actually, hey, I'm sorry for this. And what are we going to do about that together? And so I think making things right successfully actually sets up the relationship in the future to work better.
Yeah.
A lot of people are chiming in here with making things right or setting things right. I kind of wonder, are these harder to come up with? Maybe we're not quite framing it properly. But let's just get into how we would like to encourage people to do it. So and
if you have an example come up, you still please let us know.
Yeah.
As we're taking you through the how.
Yeah. You know, like the previous two, like creating context and clearing the air, making things right is something you already do, probably some of the time. And you may have a variety of different degrees of success when you've tried to do it. You know, if you ever see, you know, sometimes there's like these little listicles online, like, here's how to not apologize well, right? Like, well, I'm sorry that you felt that way, right? Like these kind of funny ways where people like feel the impulse to apologize or to make things right. And they kind of go in there and they just kind of even flub up their apology. And sometimes even make things worse. And this is our version of like having that be most likely to go well. And before I go there, I want to read this thing here. Agree very much with Peyton that it's almost impossible to move forward depending on the kind of disagreement that had happened and how both parts work to solve or increase the past conflict. Yeah, this is, I think, getting at a little bit how clearing the air and making things right can interact and support each other. So here we go. How do we make things right? We have a process called restoring relational integrity that we're going to share with you. This is our overall kind of concept in terms of like how to do an apology maybe better than you have been used to doing it. And we have a process. It's called the DEAR process. This is a friend of mine named Mark developed this some years ago, and we've just adopted it. And here's how it goes. It's an acronym. The D is for declare you broke an agreement or value. Sometimes people will start off by saying like, I'm sorry. Or they'll start off explaining like, first this happened, and then that happened, and then my coffee spilled, and I had to go back inside, and the kids were this, and then like, declare that you broke an agreement or value would be simply just stating, for example, I said I was going to be on time, and I was late. Period. It's just stating the agreement or value that you broke.
Or
Or
instead of, sometimes people say like, hey, honey, I'm sorry for how I was earlier. And then honey says, that's okay, honey. And that's sort of the end of it, except really, like, did they actually have shared reality about how he was? Can she actually count on something different? Because does she actually think, or does whoever was on the receiving end, does the receiver actually think that
Mhm.
the sharer really knows? So for just to contrast, if I say, earlier I feel like I was XYZ with you a certain way, and name the way, right? And that's not how I want to be. So I'm being more specific.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I raised my voice, and then I
I
called
raised my voice,
this name, and that really felt crappy. You know,
and it's outside of and this is where you declare that it's outside of a value. You can even say, that's not how I want to be in our relationship.
exactly.
That is, there you go.
So declare, explore any impact. This is the E, and this is really giving yourself a moment to receive from the other person what that was like for them. You can also share a little bit about the impact that it had on you, but this is really a moment to see how they were impacted by your broken agreement. Sometimes when people kind of blow through an apology, it's sort of like, sorry, I'm sorry, won't happen again, okay? And then it's like, if you're sorry, aren't you interested in what it was like for me? Sometimes people, because it feels so uncomfortable when something was violated, they kind of don't even want to hear like the impact that their action had. But giving the space and the time for that, it might be, hey, I'm interested. What was that like for you that I broke that agreement? And just listen without trying to justify or explain. You just want to listen so that they have a chance to share what it was like. And sometimes it's surprising. They'll say things that you weren't expecting. It was like, well, I was worried something was wrong with you, or something happened to you bad. It was like, oh, I had no idea you were worried that something bad might have happened to me. I thought you were just mad that I wasn't there, so you might be surprised at the impact people share when you give them an opportunity to share it.
Very, very powerful step.
Yep. Offer amends. This is essential to take a moment for it. Sometimes there's very little amends necessary. Oftentimes, if you say, hey, what can I do to make this right? How can I restore trust with you? Or is there anything you would like about this? Oftentimes people, this is where they'll say they want the explanation, So if you've been kind of like holding off on explaining, they might go like, well, just tell me how that ended up happening. Some people might be like, well, I want to be sure that you're still committed to the agreement. Another thing people might say is like, well, I do want you to say that you're sorry. Sometimes this is really important to people, is to actually hear you say those words out loud. Like, I am sorry that I broke that agreement. And sometimes it could be an extra amount of stuff. Like if it was a significant violation, sometimes amends processes, or, hey, next time around, how about I buy the coffee or something like this, or I'll treat you to lunch, lunch is on me next time, or something like that. But yeah, the idea here is that the amends, it's not something that it's just all about what you want to do to make it right. If it's like, hey, how about I buy you a chocolate bar? And you're like, well, I'm allergic to chocolate, right? Like, so it's like, it really has to be something that from your point of view, the person who was, who, I don't know, you want to call it, like violated in some way by you breaking an agreement or value, they need to believe that whatever you do for the amends is going to make it right from their point of view. That's very important.
I think of one example here, like when something has occurred with regard to, how do I want to say this? I'm struggling a little. Let me kind of reset and say this very clearly. If I feel that I haven't been honored in the community or in a conversation that somebody had with somebody else. The amends that I might want is for the person to kind of like clean that up. Like if somebody said something about me that wasn't true to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And they're cleaning that. And I'm, we're in a conversation where, Porch, the way that you spoke to, to Brian about me, it didn't really fit for me what you said. And if you're running this process with me, I might request that as amends, or you might offer that as amends, you clean that up with Brian, right? You let him know that you now have an updated understanding of something that you let him know that was false.
Yep. Sometimes people think of amends in terms of like remedies or repairs, anything like that. So that can involve relationships with other people or other things that were communicated. All right, then the last one, R. The R actually stands for recommit or renegotiate. This has to do with whether you want to continue with the agreement as you had previously established it, or if you want to renegotiate it with the person in some way. And that was actually one of the ones that I did with your sister, Josh, was we actually created we altered the terms of the agreement to kind of account for some of the variance on my end so that, and I basically said, look, dinner's on me, you give me a 2-minute grace period. And if I'm out late to the car after 2 minutes, you get a free dinner from me. And she was like, okay, I can agree to that one. So we kind of altered the terms of the agreement in a way that was workable for both of us. That may also mean sometimes you just drop the agreement entirely. Like you're like, this agreement we've had is no longer serving our relationship. There's a lot of creativity that's possible here in the recommit or renegotiate step. But this is like, what do you do about it really going forward is what this last piece is. Not just about making what happened in the past, right? Which is the amends or repair step. All right. That's our recommended way of doing the DEAR process. And there's a lot you can get out of like trying this out and getting coaching on it and getting nuanced about it. And it's a whole area of like upgrading your ability to make repairs in your relationships. Anything else you want to say before we move on?
I sometimes just like to wrap this with an affirmation that this also does not need to be a long process, right? So sometimes this can go actually very quickly. One of our friends used to talk about the moment in basketball where you've committed a foul, you elbowed somebody and they went down. And within the course of 10 or 15 seconds, I might, if I've elbowed somebody, I might go over, they're on the ground. Hey man, my bad, my foul. You all right? Can I help you get up? You offer a hand. You don't even say anything, but you offer a hand. That's offer of amends, maybe a pat on the back. And then you say like, I'll try to keep it clean, or I'll watch the elbows.
Yeah. You might even say, hey, you good? Cool.
Hey, you good?
Won't happen again. Yeah. It can happen very, very quickly. Thanks for reminding us of that, because this could seem like a big thing. All right. Let's keep going. So I'm going to share with you about how these 3 keys interact and work together in a kind of communications framework that we've been developing for many years. So let's start with creating context. Usually it starts there, although not always. This is like setting up, like what are we to each other? Are we in an intimate partnership now? Or are we exclusive with each other? It can be, the meeting that we're in for the duration that we're in, or maybe we're going on a vacation together, or it can be we're starting a business together, or we want to create a certain kind of professional deal with each other in some way. Whatever that is, that's usually where you start. You set up, all those things we talked about earlier, the what, who, when, why, how long, how often, that sort of thing. And sometimes you start with clearing the air, right? Like
sometimes it's like, I don't know if we've really had that much of an agreement, but something is now stirred in me that has me want to be like, hey, what was up with that? What happened? Right? And what comes out of clearing the air can actually become, let's make an agreement about that. Let's define some aspect of our relationship that maybe wasn't true before, but we want to have true in the future. So sometimes clearing the air is just the mutual shared reality understanding of what happened. But oftentimes, once you kind of do that, that may feed back into like wanting to kind of shape or create a new context or agreement with the person.
Hey,
Once
Porch, I noticed that, here's just a quick example is, hey, Porch, I noticed that like when we've been coming into work in the morning and we just like get right to work because we have like a huge pile of stuff that we got to get on to prepare for this webinar or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like something feels missing to me. Like I feel like I miss our friendship, you know, throughout the day. And what I would love is, you know, would you be up for at the beginning of our day, kind of no matter how much work we have, like taking 5 minutes and just like, you know, checking in, catching up on something personal,
Right.
something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Josh started by clearing the air and then turned that into a request for a new context. Then once you have a context established, that's where you actually made the kinds of agreements that you might not exactly live up to perfectly. So if we have established that thing and then I'm like fallen down on the commitment that I've made, then what I would do is go to make things right kind of in a proactive way using that communication process. Sometimes after doing the making things right, that might lead to a renegotiation, like the R step of a new commitment or agreement we want to make, which actually goes back into a creating context process where we might adjust the terms in some sense between each other. And sometimes clearing the air, these often go together as well, where, you know, I start by saying something feels off about this particular moment, and we start sharing back and forth, and one or the other, and maybe even both of us, realize we've violated an explicit agreement we've made, or we've violated our own values that we hold for ourselves in terms of how we want to relate with each other. So sometimes clearing the air can lead right into making things right. So all three of these keys kind of exist independently of each other and for different reasons, but they all interlock and interconnect with each other, where one might lead into the other like this. And this is when I think of what a healthy, functional relationship, either at work or in my personal life, when it's working well, these three things are happening on a somewhat regular basis, so that there's not like a backlog, there's not like a, you know, kind of this weight that's being dragged around by the relationship. There's not like a sense of avoidance. There's not like a sense of like, oh man, somebody might say just the wrong thing and then it's all just going to blow up. It's actually clear and smooth and moving efficiently and effectively. And yeah, I love bringing this slide up as kind of sharing with people like how those things work together. Is there anything you want to say about this before we start closing this thing out, Josh?
No, I have something loaded up that I think I'm going to say in a moment, but I think you nailed this one, Porch.
All right, cool. So, yeah, there's a lot more that we have in this particular area. I'm really glad that you all were here and were listening to us. And if you've been jazzed about some of what you've been hearing, I want to share with you, we want to share with you more about what we have coming up here. And Josh is going to talk to you about that.
Yeah, we'll just take a few minutes and tell you how you can join us if you want to next month. And then we'll let you folks go, you know, a little bit ahead of schedule. We were talking about doing up to 90 minutes. We'll end a little bit early, but not before, you know, I want to let you know that some sense, the devil is in the details with all of this stuff, right? And these three practices, these three kind of keys, very much tips of the iceberg, that if you want to practice them well, if you want to adopt them, if you're turned on by what you heard at all about what it might be like to be able to effectively set context in any relationship at any time, for example, right? Like how, like imagine that for just a moment. Like if you were to be able to set the course effectively, you know, enroll anybody in your life or in your work, you know, in the sort of direction that you'd like the relationship to go, whether that's you want to have a more effective collaboration and you know, want to set the course toward something that would be supportive of that, or more connection, something that would set the course toward that. I mean, we could honestly run a whole training alone on setting context. But you know, if we take that one, and if we take clearing the air, if we take making things right, these all nest together inside of a wider framework that we've developed that we call MetaRelating Practices. If some of you are familiar with authentic relating, I imagine a minority of folks on this call have heard that term, that phrase, which even in itself means a lot of different things in different parts of the world. Lori wants to know if the recording will be available. Yes, I understand that Jen will making it available. Oh, there she says, yep. You know, I imagine some of you are familiar with some variety of authentic relating that may or may not be the variety that Porcelli and I and other colleagues of ours have, you know, taught for the last decade or so. But meta-relating comes out of our teaching, our practice of you know, training individuals and organizations in relational practice, authentic relating over the course of 10 years or so. And we've now made these practices into a framework that's highly systematized, highly accessible and concrete and repeatable, with a number of different practices and processes, as well as a number of different skills or ways of being. We call those capacities. And what we can, I think, offer and say about, if you want to join us next month for this upcoming training, which is this joint production of HolacracyOne and Bedrock, is that you'll be able to create what you want in your relationships at any time. Any relationship that you want, you'll be able to create how it goes, or create whatever you want in those relationships, whether it's having more fun together, or more effective collaboration, or moving toward more intimacy with an intimate partner. Whatever you want in your relationships, our promise is that that is available. That's the design anyway of the upcoming training that we're offering online next month. So definitely wanted to take a moment and share with you that that is available on Porch. I want to see if you have anything to add about that before I just share a couple of logistics of the course and how to register if they want to.
Yeah, I would love to. So, yeah, Jen is posting a link there. The link will also go out after this. I want to say that, like, one of the signature ways that meta-relating might be very different than other relational practices is that we've really systematized it into repeatable processes. Josh mentioned that. And they actually work in a way that's analogous to how Holacracy practice works, except it's meant to be addressing tensions in the interpersonal dimension. So, you know, Holacracy system does a really good job of addressing work and role expectations and how those are negotiated. But people are still the role fillers. And in a culture of any organization, whether it's practicing Holacracy or not, there are going to be tensions that come up between people that really have less to do with the work itself and more to do with how you're being with each other as people. And I've found time and again, folks who are able to be current with clear and mutual context and clearing the air regularly and making things right when necessary in addition to these other practices that are part of MetaRelating, they have more influence, they have more enjoyment, they have more effective collaborating and flow, and they have more of a sense of belonging and connection with the people that they're around. And if all that sounds good to you, then MetaRelating might be really interesting place to go, because that's where we've kind of laid it all out in a system for you. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, and it applies not just to work relationships, but the upcoming training will be, is oriented around having your work relationships go in a very healthy way. So it takes place online entirely. October 7th, 29th, there's 7 sessions over the course of that time that are a few hours apiece. Also, there are weekly office hours. And the design of the course is that, you'll get practices, distinctions, and have an opportunity to practice those in real time, in groups, small groups, during the virtual sessions. But then if you want to, you also, we invite you to go into your lives and try the things 1 or 2 times in the course of a few days before you come back either to the office hours or to the next session. And you have an opportunity, if you want to actually, integrate how that went, say how it went, upgrade the process, iterate, etc. So this is a highly experiential program that integrates situations from your actual life and has them go better over the course of October, is what we're intending anyway.
We're going for
it. Jen posted a link. There's also a shortcut link that I'm aware of, which is up here as well, holacracy.org/metarelating. I think that's what I want to say about it. Porch, how about you? Should we let these guys go and thank them for coming? What do you think?
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for being interested, for caring enough to take this time out of your day to join us. My hope is that what you heard here and what you were able to reflect on in terms of your own collaborations and relationships has been of value to you, and it's something that maybe you can take into your life just based on what we've said here. And if you're eager for more and you're interested, I really hope that you grab one of these seats at the upcoming MetaRelating training and be there.
Especially just want to say, excuse me, Porch, there are a few early bird seats left and there's a certain count of them available. So they run out when they run out. So if you want to grab one of those, and I know there are a number of people on this call, so you might want to grab one of those soon.
All right, cool. Well, those are my parting words. And
thanks so much for coming, everybody. It's been a pleasure and honor to share this time with you here. Really appreciate your coming.
All right, folks. Take care.